During World War II, the U.S. and Royal Navy teamed up to create this fighter plane, which was bound to change the course of the war. But getting it right was not easy. It involved huge challenges, riskier experiments, and a race against time. This is the tale of the Corsair, one which became a legend, but not before that legend nearly came undone. The F4U Corsair was one of the best fighters of World War II, striking against the strongest of the Japanese air defense, stretching from Guadalcanal to the last days of the war. One of the most powerful and revered fighter planes of World War II. Also called the Black Sheep, the Vought F4U Corsair was an awesome fighter at the start of World War II, though the road to perfection was anything but smooth. Designed for speed, power, and firepower, it had the ability to secure control over the heavens. Early mistakes nearly took an otherwise beautiful warbird off the board. Navy personnel initially refused the Corsair carrier operations because of the bad landing characteristics. Pilots found it difficult to see beyond the long nose. It struck the deck bizarrely, with it stopping right before they couldn't see properly. It appeared that the plane, despite its furious power, would never find its intended application. Then came the British Royal Navy, with a desperate need for a superior carrier-based fighter. The Fleet Air Arm took the Corsair and refined it into a lethal war machine. British engineers modified the landing gear, adjusted the cockpit placement, and even clipped the wingtips to fit their smaller aircraft carriers. These changes transformed the Corsair into a deadly, carrier-ready fighter. British pilots soon unleashed it in the Pacific and European theaters, striking fear into enemy forces. Built primarily from aluminum, the Corsair was designed for maximum aerodynamic efficiency. The frame, composed of aluminum formers, connected through longerons, guaranteed structural integrity without compromising weight. The shape changed from an oval in the fuselage near the cockpit to a teardrop and then back into a cone towards the rear. The length of the fuselage was exactly 33 feet 8 inches, consisting of 4 principal sections: the engine section, forward section, middle section, and aft section. For an added measure of safety, a fireproof bulkhead did separate the engine from the cockpit. Another characteristic of the Corsair was the uniquely configured wings. The inverted gull wing design, with a negative 23-degree downward angle at the root and an 8.5-degree upward tilt at the outer section, permitted the installation of smaller landing gear while minimizing drag. These swing wings enclosed the air intakes, elevator gear wells, and bomb drop tank mountings. The ability of the wings to fold was indispensable if the aircraft were to operate off an aircraft carrier. The large intake ensured cooling for the engine supercharger. The famous high-speed dive created a very distinct whistle and was immediately dubbed the Whistling Death by the Japanese. The Corsair is heavily armed with 6 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, an excellent choice for fighter aircraft. It could carry up to 8 5-inch HVAR rockets and a variety of bomb loads. It was able to operate effectively within air-to-air engagements and ground attack missions. Its 233-gallon self-sealing fuel tank provided critical extra time for survival during the war. More drop tanks extended the airplane's operating range to 1,800 miles for long missions. It also enjoyed an external ordnance capacity of 4,000 pounds for operations in different combat situations. The cockpit featured a bulletproof glass canopy, while an armored seat protected the pilot. Armament switches, navigation instruments, and fuel controls were all located conveniently in the cockpit. The Mark 8 reflector gun sight allowed for accurate shooting during the plane-to-plane encounters and attacks on the ground. The enormous torque produced by the engine resulted in the need for careful throttle management during takeoff. Over 12,500 Corsairs have been produced, over 2,300 being F4U-4 variants. They achieved an astonishing 11.3 to 1 kill ratio during the war. It continued to see service during the Korean conflict and assumed a ground attack role while still claiming aerial victories. The Corsair stayed in production until 1953 and served long after the jet age began, seeing action as an invaluable asset for the U.S. and Allied forces. Its combat effectiveness, versatility, and staying power ensured its status as one of the greatest fighter planes in history. Before widespread development in the fleet, the Black Sheep was primarily used by the Marine Corps, operating from land airstrips in the Pacific. The aircraft flourished in its dual role as a fighter and ground attack platform. The Marines appreciated the speed, toughness, and damage absorption characteristics of the Corsair. The British nurtured the Corsair for carrier use. They developed better landing techniques and modified the approach pattern to avoid visibility problems. British pilot Dick Smeaton was responsible for getting Corsairs for the Royal Navy. He rightly foresaw their potential despite American reluctance. His bold gamble to put an order for 200 aircraft well before the official approval paid off handsomely. It was the modification and success of the British and carrier operations that finally convinced the U.S. Navy to take another look at the aircraft and station it on American carriers later in the war. Quickly it became the vital link between the USA carrier operations as the war progressed. With the British demonstrating that it could be safely landed on carriers, the FAA assigned the aircraft to American carriers. Although the Hellcat remained the chief naval fighter, the Corsair was integrated into the air power assembly aboard KMCI carriers. By 1944, the Corsair was firmly established as the premier fighter plane. Speed, maneuverability, and capability to absorb heavy damage and still fly home were well appreciated by the pilots. The aircraft's versatility allowed it to perform superbly in dogfights, bombing missions, and close air support. In the late stages of World War II, the Japanese conducted more kamikaze attacks by deliberately crashing their pilots into Allied ships. While the British aircraft carriers had armored flight decks that took some damage in the event of kamikaze strikes, the U.S. carriers remained more exposed to attack since their decks were wooden in construction. Kamikaze attacks had often destroyed entire aircraft parked on those American carriers. The operational effectiveness of each carrier was greatly reduced thereafter. The Corsair helped the Marines in countering this threat, intercepting kamikaze before their attacks could reach their targets. Its speed and firepower made it easy for a pilot to shoot down such threats with little difficulty, and due to its rugged construction, even if the aircraft bore damage, it would often safely return to base. The Vought F4U Corsair was indeed an agile and mighty fighter aircraft, particularly due to its unique bent wings. It had a very important role during World War II, particularly in the U.S. Marine Corps' VMF 214 Squadron, known as the Black Sheep. The squadron was commanded by Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, which he transformed into one of the most valuable senior squadrons in the Pacific. It was formed in 1943, encompassing unassigned pilots and displaying an enormous fighting spirit, totaling 97 downed enemy aircraft and further damages to 103 enemy aircraft over the course of their 2 6-week operational missions. Boyington, a capable fighter pilot and ex-member of the Flying Tigers, shot down 28 enemy planes, of which 22 were with the Corsair while leading the Black Sheep. The F4U Corsair was a sturdy and deadly aircraft, with a massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, which had it flying at high altitude speed of 446 miles an hour, or 717 kilometers an hour. It had the capability of demolition in effect with 6 50 caliber machine guns as well as rockets or bombs. Hence, they could effectively engage in aerial and ground missions. The Corsairs would shoot down 2,140 enemies at an astonishing kill-to-loss ratio of 11-1. Suffering the losses of only 189 aircrafts in aerial combat. The F4Us also dropped a record of about 15,621 tons of bombs during the war, comprising 70% of the total tonnage dropped by U.S. fighter planes. During World War II, aircraft lacked modern systems, but were still highly effective for their time. One of the most versatile planes of the era was the American Vought F4U Corsair. Developed in 1938 by Chance Vought Aircraft, the Corsair featured an iconic inverted gull-wing design credited to Igor Sikorsky and Rex Beazle. This interesting shape of wing permitted shorter, stronger landing gear, along with the large 13-foot propeller it had. The complete prototype was finished by May 1940, and its first flight on May 29, 1940. The Corsair established a mark for single-seat fighters. It reached 400 miles per hour. The problems of poor visibility for the pilot and difficulty landing were later worked out, and the aircraft went into mass production. This was a highly powerful aircraft, having an extremely powerful engine of 2,450 horsepower. Other features of the aircraft included a top speed of 453 miles per hour, along with the ability to travel up to 1,560 miles, and well above the 41,500 foot mark, which is a capacity for use outside cruising heights. Weaponry on board was as follows: 6 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, or 4 20mm cannons, as well as the option of mounting 4,000 pounds of bombs, or up to 8 5-inch rockets. The F4U Corsair made its combat debut in 1943, as it engaged the Guadalcanal campaigns. This aircraft was able to outperform the much-feared Japanese Zero fighter plane, which was the best fighter in the Pacific at the time. The Corsair had achieved almost 2,000 kills by the end of the war, and thus, it has in its name the astonishing ratio of 11-1. Pappy Boyington of the Marine Corps who was the leader of the famed Black Sheep Squadron, had made 28 victories with this aircraft. However, the Corsair was later used in the Korean War and other Cold War engagements, and being adopted by Army forces across the globe like the Royal Navy, Royal New Zealand Air Force, and French Naval Aviation. Between 1940 and 1952, approximately 13,000 Corsairs were manufactured by Vought, Goodyear, and Brewster. Among them were specialized variants including the F4U-2 Night Fighter, the F4U-1P Photo Reconnaissance Aircraft, and the F4U-4, which featured a more powerful engine and upgraded weapons. To this day, the Corsair remains one of the greatest aircraft of all time, praised for its solid structure, versatility, and combat effectiveness. During the course of the war, the Corsair gained ground helping to establish air power for the Allies, and thus became an essential weapon against the Japanese. It continued to serve long after the war in numerous conflicts as well, ensuring its place in history as one of the most prodigious fighter aircraft ever built. The Corsair, from its record speed to its dominance in the Pacific, proved that such innovation and adaptability create a legend, even in the absence of today's technologies, creating a legacy where battles were fought and won, reminding us that greatness is forged through difficult times.